For our third segment, we're going to talk about the costs associated with the Robert Crown Center project, not only the costs associated with building it, but the costs associated with the paying off the debt that we'll be issuing for the project. And with me are three guests to help talk about that. First, Erica Storley, the Assistant City Manager. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you.
Laura Biggs, the City Engineer. Laura, you've been doing a lot of those project work, and we'll talk in a minute about where we stand. And then also Hitesh Desai, the City's Chief Financial Officer.
Thanks.
So, Laura, let's start talking about the project. We broke ground last summer about where are we at and where are we headed over the next 60, 90, 120 days.
Sure. We're about 25% complete on the project. And where we are, we have poured the foundations for the buildings. We have put up the steel for 2 of the 3 segments of the main building. We call those areas B and area C, and they encompass the main ice rinks. We are in the process of building all of the concrete block walls that are the preschool room walls, the locker room walls. We have built the walls where the bleachers are going to be installed, and you can really begin to see this building coming together. Now, what's going to happen in the next few months, we are going to be finishing out the exterior of the ice rink portion of the buildings. We are going to pour the ice rink floors, which is a major operation.
So talk a little bit about that. So concrete, I imagine?
Concrete. It takes
a lot of it?
A lot of concrete. It's going to be about 40 truckloads of concrete. Each rink floor has to be done in a single concrete pour that takes about 8 hours and uses 40 truckloads of concrete. There is laser calibrated equipment to make sure that this floor is extremely flat. And so the first 2 hours, we will just be putting the concrete into the area of the rink floor, and then they'll spend 6 hours finishing the floor with the laser calibrated equipment.
So that's coming up over the next couple months.
Yes, the first pour actually will be in early July, and the second pour for the second rink floor will be in early August. After the floors are poured, we submerge them underwater to cure the concrete. It makes for a stronger, more durable concrete than it's typically done. And we actually cannot get on those floors for 28 days. We can't risk anything touching them.
Wow.
So that is a very intricate part of this. It's very exciting to see that we're getting to these stages. When you are inside the construction site, you can really begin to see how the whole building is coming together.
So as far as project schedule is concerned, we're still looking at being completed by the end of the year. Is that correct?
Yes, we are. We're looking at finishing the building portion of the project in November and having move-in during November and early December, and then having the building open.
So big question, how are we doing on the budget for the project?
We're doing okay. This is a big project with a lot of moving pieces, but Bully & Andrews, our contractor, has done a really good job of managing a lot of the costs, and we are pretty much right where we expected to be on the budget.
And so we'll finish the construction of the building, we'll open the building, and then in the spring we'll do the second phase of this with the demolition of the existing facility then, and then the construction of the fields. Is that correct?
That's correct. We will be starting in January and February with the demolition of the existing building once we've moved out of that building and are fully operational in the new building. The artificial turf fields and the parking lot are actually going to be built where the existing building is, and so the demolishing will take a pretty quick time period, 6 to 8 weeks, and then we will be on with construction of the artificial turf fields and the new parking lot.
So a lot's been talked about, Laura, about the cost of the project. We have been working on this project. I've been here as city manager for 10 years. There was at least 5 or 10 years of community discussions about the project prior to my arrival. We've had lots of numbers thrown around. Why don't you start with what's the current project budget? How did we get to that project budget? How are we assured that we're not going to leave that? I think there's been concern about what the bidding process has been. So why don't we start there, and then maybe we'll work backwards to try to explain how we got to that cost. But let's talk about the cost currently and how are we assured that we're going to be as close to budget as we can.
So the current cost of the project, the overall project, including engineering, construction, buying furniture, everything that goes into making a new park for the city of Evanston, is actually around $53 million. that includes, as I said, a lot of money that's actually already been spent on engineering and other things. There was a fundraising help that we did for a while. And so we are right in target for coming in at that $53 million level. Now that includes $3.2 million of engineering and $47 million construction contract with Bully & Andrews.
So was this the typical low bid contract, or did we go through a different process to establish all this?
We went through a different process. We used a request for proposal in order to get to where we are today. Part of the reason we did that is when we do our normal process of hiring a contractor, we get a low bid, and we are obligated by state procurement laws to accept that bid as long as that contractor has met a minimum amount of qualifications. Robert Crown is a very large project with a lot of moving parts, and our concern was if we went with that, it is not uncommon for us to have several problems on every single construction project we deal with, just because the contractor, in preparing the low bid in order to get the work, has already cut corners prior to even starting work on the site. We didn't want to be in that situation. This is a building that's going to last a very long time. It's built on a tricky site in the middle of a residential area, and we wanted to build it with as low impact to the residents as we possibly could. We also have a number of city programs that were really important to us to incorporate, making sure that we could hire Evanston residents and local businesses to participate in the project. And for that, we felt like we really needed to have a contractor that could demonstrate their not minimum qualifications, but they were highly qualified to do this kind of work and this kind of construction. So we went out with a very minimum design, almost what would be considered a schematic, where we sort of just put bubbles on a plan site and said, here's where we want a building to be. Here's where we want the site to be. And we had some narrative description of how the building was going to be constructed, what kind of materials were going to be used. But it was a very general discussion of what this building would look like. And we received 9 proposals from contractors that really demonstrated what their qualifications were. The proposals varied wildly in terms of how the contractors looked in their capability to participate, but we received 5 very good proposals. We moved forward. We had interviews with those contractors. We really grilled them on how they build a project, how do they hire people, what's involved in it, what other projects have they done, what experience do they bring to the table. And from there, we selected Bully & Andrews as a contractor that the city has worked with in the past, that Northwestern has worked with in the past, that's really demonstrated their commitment to Evanston and has proved over and over again they can build a quality facility.
So a quality facility, but also one within certain budget parameters, correct?
Yes. If you look at Northwestern, they are an agency that a lot of residents in town are not overly fond of, but Northwestern has built a lot of buildings in recent years, and they've stuck to some very tight budgets. And so working with Bully & Andrews, there was an example right in town of a project that was highly complex that they had done recently for Northwestern, and they kept to the budget. But not just that project. They demonstrated multiple projects and provided references for many different organizations they'd worked with to provide this kind of service.
So buildings underway, buildings being constructed. You just kind of described, how we got to that point and how we move forward. So let's kind of turn back the clock. We've been talking about this project for a long time. There have been many dollar amounts bandied about what the project would be. What was kind of the first dollar amount you think that was discussed publicly for the cost of this project?
The project's been discussed so long, it's hard to pick where we got really serious and we got right to the point of what we're doing today. However, in the 2011 to 2014 and 15 time period, the mayor at that time, Mayor Elizabeth Tisdall, and the aldermen really settled on a goal of $30 million that they felt this was the goal they would try to construct this facility for. Now, this wasn't a price that was based on estimates. In fact, previous iterations of the project, the city had received estimates, maybe not for the same building, but for similar facilities that were actually higher than this $30 million number. But that number was set as a target that we were going to try to meet. and we moved forward. We actually went forward with hiring an architect through late 2016 and early 2017. And in 2017, around July, the architect issued a cost estimate for the project after they'd had many group meetings with stakeholders, including aldermen, really determined what the community needs were and what we were going to include in this facility. In that 2017 cost estimate, we were up to $46 million. So at that point...
And then, I don't mean to interrupt, but the $46 million then, the project started to look like the project that we actually have under construction. I think there was a lot of discussion about the sheets of ice. Where were we going to have 2 full sheets of ice? Where were we going to have a sheet and a half like we currently have? What kind of multipurpose rooms would there be? The size of the gym? So all of those things started to finally shake out with that estimate that you just mentioned.
Absolutely. At that point, we were really trying to define exactly what facilities were going in. But what had also happened is we had gone from only looking at a building that was going to be really something all-encompassing and useful to the residents of Evanston, but not looking at the site. And Robert Crown is actually a lot more than just a building. There are a number of sports that are played there. In the current iteration, we have tennis, we have soccer, we have football, we have baseball and softball, all played on that site. But those facilities, because of the way we were going to be constructing the building, and also because they had deteriorated a lot and were no longer meeting the needs of the residents of Evanston, it was decided that the whole park would be addressed as part of this project. And so we really began to look at the exterior of the site and start to finalize some of those details. Although in 2017, we had actually not worked out all of the details.
So that number in 2017, $46 million, and that was largely the building.
It was the building and beginning to talk about some of the site issues, but we had not finalized all of the site.
So let's talk about the site. So is there problems with the site? Were there issues with the site that we had to address?
There are issues with the site. Some of these were known, but the extent of them were not known. And one of our big issues is the soil on the site. It's very poor bearing capacity. It's a type of clay that is really difficult to build anything on. You're going to see settlement over long term. And also, it simply does not drain water. It holds water. And one of the issues we have on the current Robert Crown site is that the fields flood and then they stay flooded. So we were really beginning to wrestle with how do we deal with the poor, unsuitable soils on our site. We have one site that was very well defined about where we were going to be building this building. And so it wasn't an option to just pick up and go somewhere else. We had to face the challenges we had and come up with solutions.
So $46 million, did we go from 46 to 54 in one step, or was there an intermediate step?
There was a little bit of an intermediate step in that we hired the construction manager, Bullion Andrews, and they began to price out the project. Oh, let me go back. When we went to hire the construction manager, we had given a number of construction companies our schematic designs and a discussion of what was going to be included in the site and in the building. And those construction managers, in their proposals, gave us a price of what they thought it would cost to construct. Now, they had a fraction of the information. There were no detailed plans drawn. We hadn't picked floor finishes or determined what kind of equipment was going to be in the building. We hadn't even fully determined how the extent of the artificial turf fields that were going to be on the site. But they came back with an average number of around $48 million. So we already knew that our $43 million or $46 million figure was maybe not as ideal as we hoped. We were getting an indication that things were going to be more expensive than we would have preferred. But we knew that if we were going to build a facility in today's construction world, dealing with the unsuitable soils, dealing with the needs of a wide variety of residents, that these were the numbers we were going to have to face.
And so we went then, what was then the last step? How did we finally then get to 54? Was it just the refinement of the issues that you just talked about? Was there anything new added or big things subtracted?
Well, we went forward with Bullion Andrews. Their first assignment was to actually take our drawings and develop detailed cost estimates of exactly what was going to be built. And based on working with subs, actually getting numbers. But now at this point, we really had detailed soil information, They began to look closely at how to value engineer the foundations. There were draft numbers that actually came in higher than what ultimately was determined to be a overall $53 million project. But through a value engineering process, we were able to come up with better and more appropriate ways of dealing with our stormwater, looking at how we can put in foundations on what's a very challenging site. Also dealing with some regulations that, as we were really bringing a lot of engineering firms on board as subconsultants to do detailed design, we were finding that there were some interpretations and things like stormwater regulations that the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District has that were increasing the size of stormwater detention far beyond what we expected we would need. So as we did the final cost estimate prior to getting a guaranteed maximum price, it was coming in at $53 million, but it was incorporating a lot of additional information that was getting filled in as we were doing detailed design.
So we have a price. We move forward with the price now. Hitesh and Erica, we got to pay for it. Maybe it's worth just taking a minute to talk about how these kinds of projects are generally funded in the past. So we've done a large library, probably was the last project we did. My understanding is we just, at that point, just issued debt and paid for it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of those previous projects.
So we didn't have, there was some fundraising that was done, but there was not a significant amount of fundraising. There was no public-private partnership. So it's a normal thing that when we're building a building, regardless of the size and magnitude, that's something that just comes from the general tax dollars of this city or any city, correct?
Correct.
So when we're looking at this project, maybe we start with you, Erica, and figuring out how to pay for it. What were the first steps? Did we try to find a community partner first? Did we just decide we were going to pay for it all? What's some of the history here?
Sure. So before the city embarked on this project on its own, there was an effort to try to go out and get a public-private partnership,
Right.
where we were seeing if there was an operator out there who could build the facility and operate it in conjunction with the city. The city went through a tremendous amount of effort to go down that road and see if that would be beneficial to the residents of Evanston, and ultimately it was found that it wasn't economically viable. So at that point, everybody returned to the drawing board and said, that's not going to work, we need to figure out a different way to do things. And that's kind of where this idea came to see if there was community support that would be able to fill in the gap. So the city decided to hire a fundraising consultant to determine if there was capacity within the community to fundraise enough to support operation or the building and construction of a new center. So at that point in time, the city hired CCS Fundraising. They did a market study, determined that there was some capacity, and at that point in time, they thought that the community could raise anywhere between $3 and $4 million that could go towards the project. So at that point, the city proceeded with a contract with them to work directly with the newly created 501c3, the Friends of Robert Crown, so that in conjunction they could try to raise money for the center.
So let's stop there. Friends of Robert Crown. Talk a little bit about them. How do they fit into all this? Why do we need a 501c3? Why couldn't the city just ask people, please write a check, City of Evanston?
I think that part of the reason that the Friends of Crown were created was that it's just not a typical thing for anybody to just give money to their municipality. They feel that they pay taxes and they pay for services, and so when people are at the end of the year thinking about their annual giving, just giving money to the city isn't something that they think of. But when you have an entity like the Levy Center Foundation or the Friends of the Parks, or in this case, the Friends of Robert Crown, that entity is really able to go out into the community and talk about the reasons this project is beneficial to the community, what types of opportunities there might be, and for naming rights and things like that, and do basically a fundraising effort that can supplement what the city would also be paying for this project. So the Friends of Robert Crown was established, and in partnership with the fundraiser that the city hired, they embarked on a fundraising campaign. So we had the
and the fundraiser that the city hired really was then what people were interested in directing money to this project to direct it to the Friends of Robert Crown.
Absolutely.
So
Correct.
there was never this. Well, the fundraiser was going to have the money come to the city. The city was using or has been using the Friends of Robert Crown as sort of an agent on our behalf to do this. So there's been some community discussion about the role of the fundraiser. all the time the fundraiser has been paid for by the city, and that's concluded at this point, correct?
Correct. The fundraiser was here through the end of 2017.
And then since then, the Friends have either been doing their own fundraising or the agreements, the interest that was developed has been going through the Friends.
Correct.
So where is the Friends with their fundraising? There's been a discussion about an agreement with the Friends. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about where we are with some of the other agreements that we're having with individuals and with groups?
Sure. So the Friends of Robert Crown and the city has signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, basically establishes guidelines for how the Friends will continue pursuit of fundraising. It's our hope and aspiration that the Friends will continue to flourish as a fundraising entity for decades to come. I mean, the center will have maintenance needs over time, and any additional support that the community can provide would be absolutely appreciated.
Well, and we have good examples of that. You've already mentioned the Levy Senior Center Foundation. They have continued to provide support on an annual basis for the Levy Center. The Evanston Environmental Association, same thing, where they raise money for the Ecology Center. The Noise Tenants Association raises money through their rent and other payments to support noise. So this is not an unusual thing. Not every center we have has this, of course, but this is certainly not unusual, is it?
No, not unusual at all. Fairly common, especially in our city and in other cities across the nation. And because of the support that the Friends of Crown were able to provide in terms of the fundraising, right now they're at a little over $12.5 million with a goal of $15 million. That drastically reduces the amount of the project cost that will directly impact the taxpayers of Evanston.
So we're looking, again, $12 to $15 million coming from the Friends. There's still a delta there. And so I think that takes us to Hitesh Desai, our Chief Financial Officer. Okay, Hitesh, private fundraising is a good thing, but we need additional dollars. We need them up front. We went to the bond market. Why don't you talk a little bit about how we've gone to the bond market, how the bonds were issued initially, or the authority came from what's known as a TEFRA hearing. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, and then how we've issued bonds.
Right. So obviously, yeah, I mean, the total project cost is around $53 million. Erica has touched on that. The Friends of Robert Crown, their pledge is around $15 million. Out of that, they have like $12 million in pledges, and they're going to give some money. So what we were planning that the last year we issued the bonds in the amount of $25 million as the first phase of that. And we wanted to wait until how the construction goes, how the Friends raise the funds for the second bond issue, which is upcoming later this month, and which would be for the $15 million.
But even before that, what was the process that the council did to approve?
Right, absolutely. So, yes, when we issued the bonds in 2018, obviously this was issued as a 501c3, and Erica touched on that why we had to issue 501c3 bonds, because some of those entities were getting something in return for the donations they were giving to the Friends of the Robert Crown.
Okay, so that's an important point. So there's different ways a municipality can issue bonds. It can issue them as a 501, C3. And we did that because it was not just a pure donation that folks are getting something in return. And Erica detailed in our first segment, I think pretty specifically, what some of these organizations, what all the organizations that we have been talking with are getting back in return. So I don't want to interrupt, but I think that's an important point.
Absolutely. And so that's why we had a TEFRA hearing, which is required under the IRS rules whenever you issue the 501c3, so that gives the residents an opportunity, to express their concerns, and the city gets an opportunity to why we are going through this route.
And when was this again?
This was the bonds were issued last year in August of
Okay.
2018, and based on the advice of the bond council, we went with the TEFRA hearing. It went well. The council adopted the bonds ordinance, to issue the $25 million as a project fund. After we looked at it, we sat down with Lara's team, how the construction is going, talked to Erica, how the fundraising going from the Friends at Robert Crown, and we decided that we might need around $15 million bond issue for this year. So later this month, we have a closing of the bonds on 16th of May. The sale of the bonds on 16th with a closing on June 10th. So, and that amount is $15 million for the bond.
So with the approval that came in 2018, the council had what's known as a TEFRA hearing, a tax-exempt financing hearing. The first issue of bonds in 2018, the second issue of bonds in 2019. Did that then generate enough revenue through those two bond issues to pay the bills that that Laura and her team are racking up for the construction. So we have that money we're paying. About how much are we spending a month at this point?
We've been spending about $1 million to $1.5 million a month, but we are getting to the point where we will be going around $4 million to $5 million a month for a few months.
Because in addition to the construction, we're also going to be doing furniture, fixtures, equipment costs. We bought a Zamboni not too long ago, so those are additional costs. So we've got the money that we've issued through debt in a bucket, and we're paying off the costs for the construction of the building, and then the demolition of the existing building, and then ultimately the construction of the fields. So then we'll open it, everybody will be happy, it'll be a beautiful, wonderful facility, but the real question then is how do we pay for it? So Atesh, why don't we start talking about how we pay for it? So we had a payment, our first payment on the debt will be due this year, correct?
Correct.
And,
So-
and what's that payment that I think is what, December 1st?
Right, December 1st, 2019, we have a first interest payment on the last year's bond, which we issued in 2018, of around $998,000.
Okay.
And then for the next few years, for the 18 bonds, the amount remains the same. And for 2019 bonds, these are the estimated numbers, since we haven't sold the bonds yet, the payment would be around $664,000.
Okay, so about $1 million, for all intents and purposes, $1 million.
Correct.
So do we have that $1 million in the budget for 2019? So when December 1st comes, you're able to write the proverbial check to pay that first payment?
Absolutely. We
And
do have-
how did we do that? Did we have $1 million laying around?
No, I mean, as a part of the budget process, the council went through the various options, and we looked at the thing too, and we had some raise in the property tax, which would cover the Robert Crown, as well as to recapture the Washington National TIF, which expired in 18. So we would have enough money with us for the payment of debt service due December 1st, 2019.
So a phrase that I use is baked in, and I think the definition of that, I think, is that $1 million is now part of our budget. It's
Absolutely.
ongoing expense built into our budget. So unless we make a change, that $1 million is there. So as we look at debt service, that first $1 million is baked into our budget. It will be part of our base budget in 20 and every year moving forward.
Right, you're
but you're
right.
saying that for next year, as we work on the budget for 2020, we're going to need, what, about another $600,000?
Right, another 660,000, and then again, as we get into the 2022, that's when the principal amount starts for both the bond series, 2018A and 2019A, and which would be another $1 million. So if you look at the most live average annual debt service starting 2022 would be around $2.6 billion.
Okay, so $1 million in 19 we've got covered. In 20, it's $1.6 million. So we're going to, through the budget process, have to identify additional $600,000. 2021 then is when we start paying principal, correct?
No, 2022. So
Okay, so
1.6.
So 2021, no change.
No change.
So 1.6 million in 20, 1.6 million in 2021. Then in 2022, we start paying principal, and that's another $1 million,
Correct.
which will take it to $2.6 million. And that stays steady for about how many years?
The last payment is December 1st, 2043. So it's kind of a level.
So
payment.
once we, again, using that term baked in, once we bake in $2.6 million, then that's where it will be in the budget. We won't have to look for additional dollars. However, the council has decided to make those decisions, it'll be there.
Right.
So that
I'd like to jump in just for a
You
second
bet.
to talk about the Friends of Crown donations and how those will be applied to those annual debt.
So that's
payments.
not included in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So as Tesh said, the additional money is 1.6. We've allocated the Friends of Crown donations in two ways. We've taken $6 million of the $15 million that they're raising and put it directly towards construction. So $5 million of that we'll receive in the next month directly towards construction. We'll receive another $1 million next year directly towards construction. But then we have $9 million that we can apply towards the debt. So what we've tried to do is apply those payments starting in 2022 to 2028 to smooth the payments over time, so that that 1.6 million that you referred to stays the same until 2029, which we'll see our next jump.
Okay.
So about $1 million a year from Friends of Crown for approximately 9 years keeps the payment the same, basically from 2020 to 2029 when we go up to 2.7.
2.6, yeah.
So-
Okay. So you're saying that once we get to 1.6, that we'll be able to leverage the Crown dollars to keep the general fund, let's say, portion of this at that 1.6.
Correct.
Okay, so the council could make other decisions. We can't predispose that. We'll have to get the $1 million from somewhere. And we feel confident that for that initial period, we can have that $1 million come from the Friends of Crown donations, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So where do we get the money, Hitesh? There's been a lot of discussion about what's the plan, how are we going to get the money. I mean, we have to come up with a plan every year. I mean, the general fund is what, a little under $80-odd million, depending on the year.
I mean, the general fund budget is around $115 million.
Right.
And city council.
When you double count pensions and all that, all right.
Right. City council could consider the other options too, besides the property tax. I mean, we have a strong other major revenues like sales tax, income tax, the other home rule tax revenues like athletic tax and amusement tax on the liquor tax. So yeah, I mean, city has an option to consider, whether to use any of those revenues or dedicate any of those revenue stream for the payment of the Robert Crown, or just go with the property tax, or any combination of the several.
Or we could cut expenses.
Correct.
But the order of magnitude we're talking about, certainly looking at 2020 for the impact of the 2020 budget from Robert Crown for the debt service is $600,000.
Correct.
So let's say the council just wanted to say, okay, property tax, we're not going to deal with anything else you've just described. We just want to do property tax. What kind of increase would be required on our share of the property tax, which is without the reassessment, in the 17-18% range of the entire. So for every dollar that a resident of Evanston pays on property tax, 17 cents, 18 cents
right. So,
goes to the city of Evanston.
And you're right. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the city share, it's only 16%.
16%.
If we add the other pieces to the library, general assistance, then it comes close to 20%.
Okay.
So, but yeah, if you look at it like 2018 levy, which was around $1 million, which we are going to pay in December, that resulted in like a 1.98% increase to the property tax. In 2019, we would add another 600,000, as I said, so that would be around 1.31%.
Okay, so let me stop you there. So if the council just wanted to say, fine, we're just going to use property tax, it would be a 1.31% increase to the city's, did you say 15% of the general levy?
I mean, yes, total 16% CD and 19% including library and general.
So 1.3% increase on 16%.
Correct.
Okay. So but the council could say we're going to raise other fees or charges, we're going to cut expenses, that's $600,000. That decision has not yet been made. Our job, my job as a city manager, is to present a budget that's balanced. We have no choice. We sometimes have deficits going into a budget process, but by the end of the budget process, we have a balanced budget.
Cool.
So it's $600,000 for 2020. If we find that there's no change in 21, correct?
Right.
And then in 22 and beyond, our plan would be to use some of the Friends of Robert Crown dollars to level off that final $1 million increase that we would need to have. Is that correct? To make sure we're all on the same page. So we have a plan. It's a matter of working with the city council over the course of the next several years as through the annual budgeting process to decide what makes the most sense. Last piece of the money, I think, is operations costs. So we have a group of staff that are operating the existing Robert Crown. All those folks move across the parking lot, so to speak, when the new building is done. Erica, have we done any kind of estimation of what it might be, what additional costs for operation there'll be?
Yes, we have. So we've been going through the numbers, trying to project out our future revenues. So as we talked about earlier, the new center is roughly twice the size of the existing center, so it will require additional staff to operate. But with that additional staff and having that much more square footage, there will be additional revenues to accompany it. So right now we're looking at the center bringing in an additional $1 million annually in revenues.
And where does that come from?
Additional rentals of the gymnasium, the ice rinks. Certainly it's easier to sell a full sheet of ice for an hour than it is to sell a half a sheet. There's more demand for that. That's where the market is right now. So that's part of it. And then we're able to expand the preschool programming, so there'll be an additional classroom space every day for an additional preschool room. And then, of course, we have a lot of revenue that comes from summer camps, programs, classes, arts, gymnastics, all of that.
So we're not talking taxes on Evanston residents. We're talking about fees for service.
Usage fees.
That individuals, groups, families would pay in order to access the service.
Right. So the staffing plan right now has some, I think, 5 about approximately 5. These are still working through the numbers, but additional FTEs that would be needed to operate the center. But like I said, roughly twice the size, so 5 people.
And how many are there now?
I think there's 15, and we're going to potentially go to 20 full-time FM.
And that would be part of the 2020 budget.
Yes, I mean, some of those people we may need to add on towards the end of this year so that they can learn how to operate the infrastructure. I mean, it's a very complex building. There's a lot of mechanical parts, and having some staff that are getting on board earlier and watching the center finish being constructed will help them be able to know where everything is to operate it properly. So there may be a small budget amendment that might be needed for the fall, just to add on a few people before we open the building. But largely, those fees or those increases for those staff will come from the 2020 budget. But they will be offset by the increases in the revenues that will be seen. So.
And in the earlier segment, we went through the organizations that are, and I don't think we need to recover that. So I think in summary, it's a big project. It's an expensive project. Laura, I mean, you've been working on this project for how long?
I've been working on it for 3 years solidly.
So, what's your sense as to why the change? I mean, we started, as you mentioned, the city council set a $30 million goal, which was sort of a dollar amount, not a programmatic goal. Is that right?
Yes. I think there are really 2 reasons for it. One is that there really are some site challenges, and there's some economic challenges. Construction is booming right now. It's been booming for years. And so costs have gone up over time. That $30 million number has been out there for 5 to 8 years at this point. And things have just gotten more expensive to build. But I think the other part is when we went into the community and we said, what are the needs of the community? It turned out there were some very serious needs that were not being met. A basic one, which may or may not have had a big impact on the cost, is making sure that the new Robert Crown Center is just fully ADA accessible, that the programs can be inclusive to people that have mobility issues. That was a really big change over what was originally talked about with the project. That might just be a small cost to incorporate, but there were a lot of needs and demands. And I think that when we look back 5 years from now, we will look at the center and wonder how we got by without these facilities. This will be really transforming to the community.
And then Hitesh, obviously you worry about the whole city budget, not just Robert Crown. Full all funds budget for 2019 is what?
The total of all is around $335 million.
Okay, so $335 million, general fund about $115 million.
Right.
I joked about double counting pensions, and I think it's important people understand that that's an accounting issue. We're not paying twice. It's just, we have to account for it in 2 places. So our general fund went up significantly a few years back when we had to start double counting the pensions. So there's a lot of wherewithal in this community. We receive revenue from all types of sources as a home rule community in Illinois. We have the ability to tax and have taxed a whole variety of things. We've baked in $1 million. I mean, in my 30 years of working, I've never had in one budget had to find $1 million just to put in. Have you had to ever do anything like that?
No, man.
And so, that we were able to do that, with some pain, certainly, and the discussions. What's your sense about our ability to make up that, what will be $1.6 million over the next 4 years, to get to an additional $1.6 million baked into the budget? What's your sense?
I mean,
of that?
I'm positive that looking at the strong tax revenue base and even some of those potential expense reductions. So the way we did it, and obviously we can talk about even adding $1.5 million towards the reserve for the general fund.
Yeah.
So obviously we have that kind of cushion. So definitely, we can take $600,000 and provide for that in the upcoming budget.
Right, without really having a burden on people. I think when we talk about property taxes, it's always a complicated discussion. But the reality is that the portion of the property tax the city of Evanston receives is relatively small, and so any adjustment that the city makes to the property tax is certainly an adjustment. Dollars are dollars, but on a percentage basis, on a ratio basis, it's still rather small.
Correct.
So I think we work hard, all of us, to make sure that the budget is as small as it can be for the city. And I think the council's been extraordinarily responsible in looking at both revenues and expenses. But I think the orders of magnitude we're talking about is not going to lead to, massive changes in how we operate the city of Evanston.
Right, and I don't see that. You are absolutely correct. Yeah, I don't see any major fee increases or service cuts, or how we deliver the services. So, we can definitely,
Yeah, and we think of the capital projects that the city is committed to over, let's just say, the last 20, 25 years. Certainly, the new main library comes to mind as a significant project. We've invested a lot of money on the lakefront. That was 7 or 8 years ago. That we invested a lot of money in infrastructure on the lakefront. We continue to make investments in existing facilities. The general capital program, general fund capital program is approximately every year?
We sell $9 million in bonds for capital needs every year, and then we have other funds, so we're usually running around $30 to $50 million in capital.
So it's a regular thing for us to make investments, but certainly the Crown project, I think many people have called it once in a generation. It's probably once beyond that, because certainly our hope is that this is a 2 or 3 generation facility once all is done. And I think that the revenue raising, we haven't even talked about the money that's been set aside for a maintenance fund. Mm-hmm. I think one of the challenges we've had with our facilities over time, and Laura, you deal with this every day, is the amount of money that we need to maintain buildings. We look at the Civic Center, we look at the fire stations, we look at police fire headquarters, the other community centers. We have a big inventory of facilities, and we've done a generally okay job of maintaining those over a long period of time, but it costs money.
And I think one thing that really has gotten lost in the discussion is because we've discussed doing something at Robert Crown for so many years, decades at this point, we have not invested any significant capital dollars in Crown since at least 2000, maybe earlier. So during that time period, we've invested millions in each of our other facilities. It seems like a big ticket item all at once, but had we been able to do these investments over time, it still would have been the same amount, and you would not have ended up with this brand new center that is much more able to meet the needs of the community.
Well, thank you. I think we've had a very full discussion. Hitesh Desai, the city's chief financial officer, Laura Biggs, the city engineer, Eric Storley, the assistant city manager. It's our hope that these segments talking about operations, talking about financing, and taking a tour of the facility kind of helps better understand the challenges we're facing with our Robert Crown Center. Thank you all. Thanks to Karen Danzig-Lyons and Lawrence Hemingway, who joined us earlier. I'm Wally Bobkowitz, the city manager. Thank you.